My name is Mara Voss, and I was 36 the morning I walked into family court, expecting to lose nearly everything. Nolan Rusk wanted the house, my bookkeeping firm, and custody of both children. His mother had spent 7 weeks telling people at church that I was heartless, money-hungry, and responsible for driving a decent man out of his own home. Most of the town believed her. I had stopped defending myself. Then, while we waited for the courtroom doors to open, my mother leaned toward me and whispered 2 words that made me forget how to breathe. 5 months after I signed away everything Nolan's family had demanded, every Rusk in that courtroom wished they had examined the papers before celebrating. This is the kind of story for people who understand that a woman can stay calm without being weak. If that is why you're listening, leave a comment and subscribe. It took me a long time to feel ready to tell this one. I started my business on a battered folding table in my parents' garage. 14 years earlier, before Nolan and before the children, I had 2 small clients and a used calculator with a stubborn 4 button. I did the books for a hardware store, then a cafe, then a small auto shop. Slowly, other business owners around Oak Ridge, Indiana began bringing me grocery bags full of receipts and their fear of making one mistake with the tax office. By the time I was 31, Voss Ledger Services had a narrow office downtown, 3 desks, and my name printed across the front window. I still kept the old steel key on my key ring. It had become smooth from all those mornings when I unlocked the office around 6:15. People assumed they knew what I was worth. Some thought I had far more money than I did. Others underestimated me completely. They saw steady clients, a downtown office, and the reputation my father had left behind. They didn't see how little profit remained after expenses, or how often I repaired someone else's mistake without charging because I couldn't bear watching a family lose a business over one bad calculation. That was how I lived. I was the person people called when payroll was short, when a bank noticed something suspicious, or when a business owner needed help but couldn't afford another bill. I balanced my company, our home, and everyone else's emergencies. I never asked anyone to carry part of mine. I had convinced myself that was strength. It took a courtroom and an unfaithful husband to show me that the people around me had also learned how to use it. Nolan had the kind of charm that worked especially well on strangers. He could make someone feel fascinating during a sales pitch, then fail to remember their name before he reached the parking lot. I married him at 25. For a while, we were happy enough. The serious trouble began 4 years before the divorce, when one of Nolan's side businesses collapsed. He had put our savings and borrowed money into a partnership with a man who turned out to be selling promises instead of a real opportunity. When the debt came due, Nolan sat across from me at the kitchen table looking sick with worry. I responded the way I always did. I shifted money through the business, covered the immediate problem, and kept the failure away from his credit and his pride. I thought I was helping my husband. I didn't ask for praise. Instead, Nolan began carrying resentment that I didn't recognize. He made little comments that were supposed to sound playful. "You really can't leave anything unfixed, can you?" Or, "It must be convenient always being the clever one." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Sometimes I reached for his hand afterward. At some point, Nolan decided my competence was a form of control. To him, every spreadsheet became proof that I was managing him. He never thanked me for saving him from the debt. He simply began keeping a private list of everything he believed I had done to him. I didn't know about the affair yet, but when I look back, that night at the kitchen table was when our marriage truly ended. I kept working at it for another 4 years, trying to balance a relationship that had already stopped making sense. The warning signs were easy to dismiss because none of them looked dramatic. His sales meetings ran late. He came home wearing a cologne I had never bought. His phone began staying screen down on the nightstand, buzzing where he could reach it first. I want to be clear about something. I never searched his phone, recorded him, or set up some secret device. I have spent my career handling other people's private information, and I know the difference between noticing something and invading someone's life. so I noticed. Tessa Vale kept appearing around him. She was the real estate agent who had sold us the house on Willow Lane years earlier. She was polished, confident, and suddenly present at the same bakery, the same pharmacy, and the same community fun run. I kept telling myself there could be an innocent explanation. Then, one afternoon, Nolan was showering when his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to read it, but the message appeared before I could turn away. Find out exactly what her father left her. That was all. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even personal in the way a love message would have been. It was a question about my inheritance, sent by a woman who already knew how our house was arranged. I stood in my kitchen and understood that this was no longer only about a failing marriage. Nolan and Tessa were making plans around my life, my home, and the money my father had left me. They had started calculating. I needed to do the same. Here is what was at stake. There was the house on Willow Lane, where Nora had taken her first steps and Eli had lost his first tooth. There was my business, the only thing I had built entirely by myself. There was my reputation in a town where the person scanning your groceries might sit behind you at church on Sunday. And there were my children, 10 and 8, who still believed their parents were supposed to work together. That was the part no financial statement could measure. My father, Arthur, had died 6 years earlier. He left me about $215,000 and his share of a small piece of land outside Oak Ridge. He had worked as a payroll clerk before retiring, and early in his life, he had trusted the wrong business partner. He taught me one rule when I was 17. "A dollar leaves a trail," he used to say. "Keep yours where you can follow it." He meant that I should keep inherited money separate, record its source, and never allow my accounts to blend into someone else's. When his estate was distributed, I placed the money in an account under my name alone. I never used it for a marital expense. Every deposit was recorded in the blue ledger he had given me, with his square handwriting filling the margins. Beside one entry, he had written, "Keep it apart." I had followed that rule for years without ever needing to know whether it would protect me. I was about to find out. Nolan didn't tell me he was leaving. His attorney did. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday at my downtown office. The process server handed them to me where anyone walking past the front window could watch. I shut my office door and read through them alone. Nolan wasn't simply requesting a divorce. He wanted the house. He wanted an equitable share of Voss Ledger Services, which was the polite legal wording for asking for half of the company he had never worked in, except when he needed money. He also wanted primary custody of Nora and Eli. His attorney was Colin Rusk, Nolan's cousin on his mother's side. That told me the lawsuit had been discussed long before those papers reached my desk. One demand required me to submit the business for a formal valuation as a marital asset. I sat behind my desk, trying to make sense of a document that seemed to turn my entire life into property. Then I did the only thing that made sense to me when the numbers stopped lining up. I called a lawyer. Priya Nwosu had been recommended by a local business owner I had helped years earlier. She spoke calmly and never wasted words. Within minutes, I had told her about Tessa, the house, the company, and the children. She listened, wrote a few notes, and then asked one careful question. "Mara, did any part of your inheritance ever go into a joint account?" That pause told me she already understood what Nolan's side was trying to do. "No," I said, "not even once." My father's voice seemed to fill the room as I answered. The inheritance had stayed in its own account, under my name, with no marital money mixed into it. The company was also a one-owner LLC I had formed before Nolan and I married. It had separate records, separate tax filings, and a documented history reaching back 14 years. Priya set down her pen. "Then they may be pursuing property that isn't available to them," she said. "In Indiana, an inheritance that remains separate and traceable can stay separate. The same may apply to a business owned before the marriage, provided you can prove it was never blended into marital ownership." For a moment, I felt some pressure lift. Then she leaned closer. "But having the law on your side doesn't make the process painless. You have to show where every dollar came from and where it went. Their argument will be that after 11 years, something must have become mixed. They'll keep filing things, delaying things, and making you spend money until you're too exhausted to continue. I understood immediately. And the town? I asked. Priya's expression tightened. The town isn't a courtroom. Documents can prove your case to a judge. They can't force people to believe you. That was the part that frightened me most. My records were strong. My father had prepared me for this long before I knew there would be a this. But Diane Rusk had already given the town her version of events, and people had accepted it. Diane never needed to shout. She was 67, silver-haired, and known for bringing food to funerals and remembering everyone's birthdays. When a woman like that lowered her voice in a church kitchen, people moved closer to hear. I learned what she had said from other people. According to Diane, I was cold. I had supposedly kept Nolan on a strict allowance and hidden money from him for years. She suggested it was no wonder he had looked elsewhere when his own wife treated him like a subordinate. She never directly mentioned the affair. She simply offered enough information for everyone else to reach the ugliest conclusion themselves. Within a week, conversations stopped whenever I entered a room. A woman whose taxes I had prepared at cost crossed the street rather than greet me. Tessa, meanwhile, no longer acted discreet. She appeared beside Nolan at a Friday football game, at the feed store, and at a restaurant where she laughed loudly and rested her hand on his arm for everyone to see. She was already behaving like Nolan's next wife. She talked as if my home were a space she would soon rearrange. The loneliness was worse than the gossip. For 11 years, I had been the person people trusted with their money and their secrets. Now that someone was taking from me, people couldn't imagine me as the one being cheated. They looked at a capable woman and assumed she must have caused the problem. Then Nolan involved the children. He had never been the parent who knew the pediatrician's phone number or remembered which child refused crusts. Suddenly, he was arriving with an electric scooter for Eli and promising Nora a pony. He told them that maybe they would all soon live together in a much larger house. He didn't say I was the obstacle directly. He didn't have to. He allowed them to believe it. I found out when Nora came home unusually quiet. "Mom," she asked, "are we broke now?" I got down on the kitchen tile so we were at the same height. I didn't cry, and I didn't criticize Nolan. I had decided from the beginning that no matter what he did, the children would not be forced to hear me destroy part of the family they came from. But I made a promise to myself. That night, I called Priya and asked what I could do to protect them. The next morning, we requested a guardian ad litem, someone neutral whose responsibility would be the children's actual welfare. I kept Nora and Eli in the same school. Their bedtime remained the same. Their soccer schedule stayed intact. Stability matters, Priya told me. It can speak for itself. Nolan offered expensive surprises. I kept serving dinner at the same hour and leaving the hallway light on at night. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like holding on to two small hands while someone else tried to pull them away with gifts. At bedtime, Nora asked me again, "We're still okay, aren't we?" "We're okay," I told her. For the first time, I tried to believe my own answer. Oak Ridge's annual harvest supper was held in the church hall every fall. Folding tables filled the room, and nearly everyone in town showed up. I considered staying home, but avoiding the event would have looked like an admission that Diane's story was true. So I went. I wore a simple dark blue dress, accepted a plate of food, and made conversation with people who kept glancing past me. I could feel the room discussing me without saying my name. Diane sat near the center table with Nolan beside her. Tessa was only a few chairs away. I was getting coffee when Diane spoke loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Someone had asked how I was managing. Diane smiled. "Oh, Mara will survive somehow," she said. "If she's fortunate, she might even hold on to the name she brought into the marriage." The people around her laughed. It wasn't a harsh laugh. That made it worse. They laughed as if the joke had already been approved by everyone in the room. I placed my cup on the table and walked out. I didn't give them tears or an argument to repeat later. I crossed the parking lot, got into my car, and sat there with the doors locked. Instead of crying, I pulled a pen and an old store receipt from my purse. Then I started writing. When my life becomes impossible to understand, I reconcile it. That night, I began auditing my own situation. The first thing I reviewed was the joint mortgage on Willow Lane. I had every legal right to request those records. That was when I discovered Nolan had refinanced the property 5 months before filing for divorce and opened a home equity line. Nearly all the equity we had built over 11 years was gone. The money had not gone into savings. Nolan had put it into a property flipping venture with Tessa listed as his partner. To secure the loan funding that venture, he had also signed a personal guarantee, placing his own name behind the entire debt. I had noticed the refinance when it went through and called the lender, but the mortgage was joint, and there was nothing I could legally do to stop one borrower from taking money out of a property when the lender had already accepted the signatures. I could only record what happened, so I did. I collected every statement, transfer, and date. I documented the movement of the money the way my father had taught me to document everything. As the records came together, I saw what Nolan had missed. He believed he was gathering assets, the house, the business, and a future with Tessa. In reality, he was collecting obligations. He had built a legal case around property that came with more debt than value. He simply hadn't read his own paperwork carefully enough to understand it. Colin's strategy was expensive exhaustion. If the law could not give him what he wanted, he would make the case so costly that I would eventually surrender. He filed motion after motion. He demanded another valuation of the business, then requested another one after that. He even sought temporary spousal support from me, presenting me as a wealthy wife who had supposedly hidden money from a struggling husband. Every letter required a response. Every response took money away from the children's needs. Some nights I sat at the kitchen table near 2 a.m. with the blue ledger open beside me and wondered whether being right was worth the price. Priya kept reminding me of the same thing. "We don't win by making more noise," she said. "We win by leaving a record." So I kept going to the office. I kept serving clients. I fixed Nora's hair before school and made sure Eli had his cleats. I did those things even on mornings when I felt too tired to stand. It was a kind of exhaustion that didn't show on the outside. If you've ever been the person everyone depends on, the one who solves problems for everyone else, while nobody asks whether you're holding up, you know what I mean. If this feels familiar, comment, "I see her." Then subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. The following morning, I went to the bank and collected the proof that changed the case. My father had spent my childhood teaching me that being correct and being able to prove you're correct are two different things. I went to the bank where the inheritance account had remained untouched for 6 years and requested a certified transaction history. It showed every deposit from my father's estate. It also showed that no marital money had ever entered the account and no inheritance money had ever been used for a marital expense. After that, I went to the law office that had handled my father's estate. His probate records were still stored there. I requested certified copies of his will, the estate distribution, and the deed to the land outside town. From my own files, I gathered the LLC formation papers for Voss Ledger Services, dated before my marriage, along with 14 years of separate business tax returns. I placed everything into a thick binder and took it to my mother's house. Evelyn was 66 and had always been direct. She looked at the binder, then at me, as I opened the blue ledger beside it. On one page, my father had recorded the same deposit dates years earlier. In the margin, he had written the word apart. Beneath it was another reminder, leave a trail. The certified bank records matched his handwriting perfectly. The proof ran from his estate to my account without a break. Every document was there, every date, every signature. The company and the inheritance had remained mine throughout the marriage. My mother placed her palm on the binder and sat quietly for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "the smartest move is letting people take responsibility for the burden they're so determined to claim." I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was trying to comfort me. She was giving me a plan. A few days later, I ran into Tessa in the grocery store parking lot. We both reached for the same cart return, so pretending not to see each other wasn't possible. Without the polished smile she wore around town, she looked tired. For a moment, neither of us acted like we were supposed to. "You think I'm the villain," she said. I didn't answer. She put her bags into her car and spoke more quietly. "You have no idea what it's like to reach my age with nothing." Both times I walked away, I lost whatever I thought I had. For one brief moment, I understood what she meant. She had built her life around 2 relationships and watched both financial settlements disappear. She had reached a point where she believed only a house or another asset could keep her safe. I had seen that fear in clients who realized their retirement numbers didn't work. I almost felt sympathy for her. Then her expression hardened again. "The house is basically mine already," she said. "Nolan told me the old wallpaper can go. I never liked it." She had already stood inside my home and decided what should be removed. She had imagined my daughter's first steps and my son's childhood as part of her future renovation. The sympathy disappeared. I didn't hate her. Hate required more energy than I had left, but I stopped confusing fear with innocence. Tessa was frightened, and she was still choosing to be cruel. I left her with that choice. That weekend, while we washed dishes at my mother's house, Evelyn told me something about Arthur that I had never heard before. "Your father wasn't always careful with records," she said. She handed me a plate to dry and explained that, before they met, Arthur had gone into business with a friend he trusted like a brother. They shook hands instead of signing a contract. They put all the money into one account because, at the time, that was what trust meant to him. The friend emptied the account and took the business with him. Arthur didn't only lose the money, he lost the ability to prove which money had belonged to him. It took him years to recover. After that, he documented everything. That was why the blue ledger existed. That was why he always told me that every dollar left a trail. It wasn't a personality quirk. It was the scar left by losing everything through a handshake. I had spent my life thinking his rule was about organization. It had really been about protection. Evelyn dried her hands and looked at me. "Your father used to say something when he played cards," she said. "The person making the most noise usually has the weakest hand." I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had managed in weeks. I had spent nearly 2 months being loudly accused by people who were risking everything they owned. Maybe my father had understood them too. A week before the hearing, Priya laid out the entire case for me. "Their argument has 3 pieces," she said. "They want the business treated as marital property. They want the inheritance treated as mixed with marital money. And they want the house and other shared property divided." She counted them off. "The first 2 arguments fail because your records are solid. The house, vehicles, furniture, and other things acquired during the marriage are different. Nolan has the legal right to fight for his share of those." "So we fight him for the house," I said. "We can," Priya replied. "We might even win." I looked at the mortgage records I had collected. What is the house actually worth now? Priya pulled out the appraisal and the payoff information. She added the refinance, the home equity line, and the loan Nolan had guaranteed. Then she stopped talking. The equity in the house was not merely reduced, it was negative. Once the obligations were included, the property was worth less than the debt attached to it. I thought about my mother's advice. Let them take responsibility for what they were demanding. Now I understood. The prize Nolan and his family kept describing was a trap they had constructed themselves. I made Priya go through the numbers several times because I didn't trust anything that looked so favorable. But the result never changed. Whoever received the house would receive the mortgage, the equity line, and the related obligations. Nolan had also guaranteed the loan used for Tessa's investment venture. Then we reviewed the business. Priya pointed out what Colin had failed to understand. Voss Ledger Services wasn't valuable because of an office or a logo. It was valuable because clients trusted me. "Take Mara out of the business," she said, "and what remains? A lease and some office equipment. The clients will follow her the moment she leaves." even if the judge had somehow treated the firm as marital property, which my records made extremely unlikely. Half of a business without the person who operated it would have very little value. I sat there and saw their entire plan differently. They had spent money and legal effort trying to take 3 things from me: a house buried under debt, a company whose value depended on the woman they were attacking, and children whose daily lives they had barely helped manage. Every asset Nolan was fighting to acquire could damage him financially. I hadn't set a trap. He and Tessa had made their decisions without my help. I had only kept the records. The truth didn't immediately make life easier. Diane's version had hardened into accepted fact through repetition. In the final weeks before court, people still spoke of me as the cold wife who had hidden money and pushed Nolan away. I heard that Diane had repeated the joke about my maiden name at a women's gathering, and everyone had laughed again. A woman I had known since high school stopped returning my calls. For 3 years, I had helped keep her struggling flower shop open. That silence hurt more than I expected. I could have exposed everything. I could have gone into the church hall with the mortgage records, the guarantee, and the certified statements. Priya told me not to. "Keep the truth for the room where it matters," she said. "Don't defend yourself to gossip. If you do, you've already let gossip set the rules." So I stayed quiet. There is a difference between being silenced and choosing not to speak. I chose silence, though some days it nearly broke me. One afternoon, Nora came home from school, climbed onto the couch, and told me a classmate had said we would lose the house and end up sleeping in our car. I held her close. I couldn't promise we would keep Willow Lane. By then, I knew we were going to give it up. Instead, I made her a promise I could keep. "We will always have a home," I told her. "I built one once from almost nothing. I can build another." She believed me. Now I had to make sure that belief became true. During the week before court, Priya and I assembled the evidence. The binder contained the bank-certified inheritance history, the probate papers, the land deed, the LLC formation documents, 14 years of separate returns, the mortgage and refinance records, the home equity line, and Nolan's personal guarantee. Everything came from official sources or records I had the right to access. There were no secret recordings, stolen messages, or private traps. It was simply a documented history. The day before the hearing, Priya let me sit inside the empty courtroom for a few minutes. She wanted the room to feel less unfamiliar when the real day came. An old radiator clicked along one wall. The benches were hard and cold. I sat there, listening to the steady sound until my breathing slowed. Then Priya explained the actual plan. "When they ask for the house, don't fight them," she said. "When they ask for the shared property, let them take it. Sign over your interest." I must have looked at her as if she had lost her mind. She gave me the smallest smile. "Trust me, the worst thing we can do is allow them to win exactly what they came for." For the first time, I felt something close to calm. Nolan's side made one last attempt before court. Colin sent over a settlement offer dressed up as compromise. If I surrendered my interest in the business, they would supposedly be more flexible about support. Perhaps, they said, I might even be allowed to keep the smaller vehicle. The offer was designed to sound generous. It was actually the most important trap they had set. The company was mine. It had been formed before the marriage, kept separate and protected by the records. The only way it could enter the marital property division was if I voluntarily signed it in. They couldn't take it from me. They needed me to donate it. During the meeting, Colin pushed the papers across the table. "It would show cooperation if you also handed over the office key while everything is being sorted out," he said. Without thinking, I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the old steel key, worn smooth from years of early mornings. Then I stopped. I withdrew my hand and kept the key in my fist. "No," I said. "The office stays with me." Colin's confidence slipped. He hadn't expected a quiet refusal. I left the papers unsigned and walked out with the key still in my pocket. Finally, I knew exactly what they were counting on. Their case depended on me being too frightened or exhausted to read what they put in front of me. They had chosen the wrong bookkeeper. So I made my decision. I would not fight for the house. I would not contest the furniture, the vehicles, the appliances, or any other marital property they were so eager to claim. I would let them have all of it, the house on Willow Lane, the remaining possessions, and the debt buried beneath the appearance of a valuable life. But I would not surrender Voss Ledger Services. I would not pretend my inheritance belonged to Nolan. And I would fight without hesitation for Nora and Eli. That was my boundary. Priya confirmed the plan was legally sound. I would give up shared property that was financially underwater, protect the separate property supported by my records, and focus the custody case on the one thing I had consistently provided: stability. It looked like surrender. It was strategy. I won't pretend it was easy to walk into court prepared to give away the house where my children had grown up. The night before the hearing, I sat at my mother's kitchen table with the blue ledger open in front of me. The word "apart" was still written beside my father's old entries. His entire defense had been prepared decades before I needed it. I was going to hand Nolan's family their prize while they believed I had finally collapsed. Only Priya and my mother understood why I wasn't fighting. I barely slept. I stayed in the spare room at Evelyn's house while the children slept down the hall. I practiced answering in a calm, even voice. Priya had told me not to win the argument in the courtroom. "Let them win the argument," she had said. "You're there to win the war." Near 2:30 in the morning, I stopped trying to sleep and returned to the kitchen. I opened the ledger again and looked at the dated entries from the inheritance account. I touched the key on my ring and thought of Nora asking whether we would have to live in a car. I had promised her a home. I knew how to begin with very little. I had done it once in a garage with a faulty calculator. I could do it again. By sunrise, fear was no longer the only thing I felt. I was prepared. I wasn't going to compete with the Rusks by shouting louder or acting angrier. I was going to bring certified documents, keep my voice level, and let them walk into the consequences of their own choices. The courthouse hallway smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Nolan's family was already waiting, and they looked pleased with themselves. Diane sat upright in her best coat, speaking to anyone who would listen. Nolan stood nearby with his hands in his pockets, looking like someone waiting to collect a prize. Tessa had come too. She leaned toward Nolan and murmured something. I heard the word wallpaper and almost smiled. Colin shuffled his papers with the confidence of someone who hadn't studied them carefully. The radiator clicked along the wall. I sat on the wooden bench and focused on that sound until my breathing became slow and regular. Evelyn sat beside me and took my hand. Then she leaned close enough that her voice barely reached me. "Give everything." Those were the two words she had been trying to give me all along. Give Nolan the house. Give Tessa the property she thought she was inheriting. Give Diane the victory she had advertised to the town. Let them accept everything they had fought so hard to obtain. I finally understood. My mother wasn't telling me to lose. She was telling me to let them choose the exact burden that would bring them down. The courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called our case, and I stood, straightened my dark blue dress, and walked inside. I gave them everything. When the judge raised the issue of the marital home, Colin began with the argument he had clearly practiced. He was ready for resistance. Priya stood instead. "My client does not contest Mr. Rusk receiving the marital residence," she said. "She is prepared to transfer her interest in it." Colin stopped. Nolan turned toward his mother. Diane's face brightened. The court went through the other property one item at a time. Nolan received the vehicles, the furniture, the appliances, and the contents of the house. He received what remained in the savings account, which was almost nothing. I signed each document with a steady hand. With every signature, the Rusk family looked more pleased. Diane reached over and squeezed Nolan's arm. Tessa sat straighter in the gallery. already imagining how she would change the house. They believed I had finally broken. They thought the pressure, the gossip, and the legal bills had defeated the supposedly calculating wife. I let them believe it. The only thing I did not surrender was the company. When Colin tried to include Voss Ledger Services in the agreement, Priya submitted the LLC formation papers. They showed that the business had existed under my ownership before the marriage. The judge reviewed them and moved on because there was no reasonable argument left. Throughout the hearing, I kept one hand in my lap around the old steel key. They could have the property they could see. They could not take what had never belonged to them. The property agreement was signed before the appraisal and debt figures were formally reviewed. Nolan and his attorneys signed in obvious triumph. That was exactly what we needed. Then Priya stood and began presenting the financial records. Her voice remained calm. First, she entered the certified history of my inheritance account. The records covered 6 years and showed that every deposit came from Arthur Voss's estate. Nothing marital had entered the account, and none of the money had been used jointly. She explained that under Indiana law, separate property maintained in a traceable form remained separate. The documents established that clearly. The judge reviewed the records and confirmed that the inheritance belonged to me. Next came the business. Priya submitted the LLC formation documents and 14 years of separate records. Voss Ledger Services was created before the marriage and maintained as an independent business, she said. It is not a marital asset. Colin shifted in his chair. Then Priya moved to the house Nolan had just accepted. She submitted the refinance documents, the home equity line, the records showing the money had been taken out and put into the venture with Tessa, and the updated appraisal. The numbers were read into the record. There was no usable equity. Then Priya produced the personal guarantee Nolan had signed for the loan that funded Tessa's property business. She placed it on the table and folded her hands. My client has no objection to Mr. Rusk taking the residence and the obligations attached to it, she said. The room changed. Colin grabbed the appraisal and read it again. His confident expression disappeared. Nolan leaned over to see the figures, and the color drained from his face. The house he had fought for was worth less than the debt secured against it. The equity he had drained was gone. The loan he had guaranteed was tied to his own name. He had received every item he had demanded. He had also accepted a mountain of debt. I sat quietly with my hands together. I didn't need to say anything. My mother's 2 words had become the entire argument. Give everything. They had accepted it eagerly before learning what came with it. The judge looked toward Nolan's family. That was when Diane lost control. I had never seen her like that. Her church smile vanished, and she stood before the judge finished speaking. She turned on Colin first. "How did you miss this?" she demanded. "What exactly were we paying you for?" Colin tried to explain something about disclosures and the timing of the documents, but his words tangled as he gathered the papers. Then Diane turned on Nolan. She called him careless. She accused him of letting Tessa lead him into a disastrous deal. She told him he had lost the family home and taken on a debt no one in the Rusk family could afford. Her words were cruel, but unlike the things she had said about me, these accusations were true. Nolan looked toward the gallery for Tessa. Tessa was already standing. The property venture had consumed the equity in the house, and the man left holding the guarantee was no longer the wealthy partner she had expected. She headed for the doors without waiting for Nolan. The judge struck the gavel and demanded order. The bailiff moved forward as the Rusk side of the room erupted into the kind of public scene Diane had spent weeks accusing me of creating. I remained seated. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. The documents had already said everything better than I could. When the courtroom settled, the judge addressed custody. The guardian ad litem's report was straightforward. One parent had kept the children in the same school, maintained their routines, and provided consistent care. The other had been offering expensive gifts while living unpredictably and introducing the children to a woman they had met only a couple of times. Primary custody was awarded to me, with Nolan receiving a standard visitation schedule. Something inside me finally released. Nora and Eli were safe with me. I had promised Nora that they would always have a home, and now I had the chance to build one. I had spoken very little in that courtroom. I hadn't needed a speech. The most important thing I had done had happened years earlier, when I followed my father's rule and kept every account separate. The people who had made the most noise had been holding the weakest position all along. Tessa didn't make it to the parking lot before leaving. I saw her through the hallway window while I gathered my binder. The radiator was still clicking beside the bench. She confronted Nolan outside, but she didn't stay long. The house she had helped him pursue was now a debt, and Nolan was attached to a loan he could not carry. Tessa had spent her adult life learning to tell the difference between real wealth and the appearance of it. It took her less than a minute to understand what Nolan actually had. She walked to her car without turning around. The fear she had described in the grocery store, the fear of reaching her age with nothing, had become the result of choices she had made knowingly. Then Diane found me in the hallway. Her composure had returned, though it looked hurried and fragile. She spoke in the reasonable tone she used when she wanted other people to think she was being fair. "Perhaps," she suggested, "we could reconsider parts of the arrangement. Maybe I didn't really want the house and its problems. Maybe the family could come to some private understanding." I looked at the woman who had told an entire church I would be lucky to keep my own name. My hand closed around the key in my pocket. "No, Diane," I said calmly. "I'm keeping what I built. You can keep what you fought for." Then I picked up my binder, took my mother's arm, and walked toward the courthouse doors. Behind us, the radiator continued its steady clicking. Evelyn waited for me at the top of the steps. It was a cold afternoon, but neither of us celebrated. We didn't hug and cry or make a scene. She simply looked at me and nodded. I thought about my father's old business partner, the handshake that had emptied his accounts, and the blue ledger he kept afterward to make sure his daughter would never lose everything without proof. I had followed his rule for years without realizing what it might protect me from. That day, his careful record stood between me and ruin. Behind us, the Rusks were still arguing in the courthouse hallway. Their voices faded as the doors closed. At my mother's house, Nora and Eli were waiting with the hallway light on. I took the first step down, then another. I had entered the courthouse expecting to lose everything. I left with the only things that had ever truly belonged to me. The consequences unfolded gradually. Within 9 months, Nolan could no longer maintain the house on Willow Lane or the debt connected to it. The bank began its process, and the home where our children had taken their first steps was sold to strangers for less than the amount owed. The personal guarantee followed Nolan into his credit history and his future. It became a debt that would stay with him for years. Tessa's venture collapsed soon afterward. The partnership ended, and she moved on to whatever came next. Diane's campaign through the church kitchen and women's gatherings eventually turned against her. Oak Ridge remembered what she had said, and once people understood who had actually caused the financial damage, the casserole slowed, and the seat beside her at church was no longer always occupied. People don't remain fooled forever. I kept my office and my name on the front window. Some clients who had backed away during the gossip eventually returned, looking embarrassed. I accepted them without bringing up the past. Resentment is another kind of debt, and I had decided not to carry it. Before the year ended, I bought a small home on the north side of town with my own separate, traceable money. It had 4 bedrooms and a kitchen large enough for all of us to sit together. Nora chose the paint for her room. Eli claimed the yard for the dog he hoped we would get someday. I kept the hallway light on every night. For the first time in years, the home it illuminated belonged entirely to us. People in town still ask about the divorce, usually carefully, as if they aren't sure whether the wound has healed. They ask whether I lost everything: the house, the marriage, my reputation. I always give them the same answer: I gave her everything. I gave Tessa the house she had already begun redesigning in her imagination. I gave Nolan the vehicles and the property. I signed over the entire visible pile with a calm expression. None of them understood what that property was going to cost. I keep my contact with the Rusks polite and limited. Nolan sees the children according to the schedule. We don't discuss wallpaper. Diane once told a room full of people that I would be fortunate to keep my maiden name. I think about that sometimes because of how completely wrong she was. The name Voss is still printed across the glass of my office. It appears on my children's school forms, on the deed to the home I purchased myself, and on the blue ledger my father gave me when I was 17. I didn't merely keep my maiden name, I kept everything that name represented. The lesson I took from all of this is simple. Leaving a courtroom with fewer possessions doesn't mean you have less, especially when what remains is finally and completely yours. That is my story. 2 words from my mother, 1 ledger from my father, and a courtroom full of people who fought to possess a debt. If this reminded you that quiet records can defeat loud certainty, keep your own documents and protect your own name. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Leave a comment and subscribe.